Payday is a franchise centered around two core gameplay concepts. You steal loot and you shoot guns. So what happens when you take away one of those features? Can we still be a king amongst thieves without the need for firearms? In other words, can you beat Payday 2 without firing a bullet? Obviously, this challenge is incredibly vague, so we're going to need some more defined rules. Also, Payday's not a game with an easily definable start and finish, hence the many thousands of hours people sink into it without calling it quits. However, it does have a story mode made up of 55 assignments, starting with the basics and ending at the White House. To do this officially, we're going to need to start from scratch at level 0 and work our way through the story from beginning to end. Unfortunately, Yelwonk over here is a willing test subject, ready to reset game progress and face hordes of heavily armed cops with his bare fists if he needs to. Except the Payday 2 story is incredibly easy. The hardest difficulty you're required to play on is very hard, which contrary to its name, is really not. So we're going to need some more rules to spice things up. Firstly, as I've mentioned, the account must be set to level 0 with no infamy bonuses. Oil Heist must be played in single player with no online assistance allowed. There will be no grinding for cash or experience outside of the main story missions. All progress must be earned naturally across assignments. Additionally, AI crew members are not permitted when they are going to directly assist through the act of firing bullets. If Yelwonk's not allowed to shoot, neither are the rest of the gang, meaning they can be brought along, but only on stealth heists for those stat bonuses. Also, we're going to be avoiding most mods for this challenge, with only HUD related mods being enabled, as I'm not sure I can play the game without them anymore. This is Wolf HUD for those of you wondering. And of course, the most important rule: absolutely no shooting our guns. Even if it's caused by a taser, shots fired are an immediate heist restart, and if a bullet kills someone, then that's it. Run, over, you've been warned. I'll also be doing my very best to avoid the obvious option of sentry turrets here. I feel like it kinda goes against the whole no guns thing if we bring one in our back pocket anyway, so I'll only turn to this equipment option if all else fails me. Finally, just in terms of difficulty, I've thought long and hard about this one. Obviously, the suggested difficulties are too easy even with the challenge of not shooting, so the rules are the game must be played at the highest available difficulty to the player at the time, excluding death sentence. I think just a single heist played like this in death sentence could constitute its own video, so we'll be leaving that for another day. That means once the tutorial heists are done, Mayhem will be the difficulty of choice all the way up until we hit level 80 and Death Wish becomes available. So, let's do this. Starting off on a brand new account with Yelwonk, we had no money, skills, and just a Chamano and Amcar, which Rust over here wasn't even allowed to fire. I'd worked out that there were essentially 5 legal methods which I could employ to take out cops. My options were melee weapons, throwables, equipment, saws, and jokers. Cars and traps would also be fair game in heist, which offered them. I'd need a plan to deal with special type enemies as quickly as possible though, so I got ready for the tutorial heist with some dynamite, C4, and the Alabama Razor equipped for style points. Entering the stealth tutorial, things started smoothly, even without being able to shoot thanks to the one-shot nature of stealth kills. That was until I missed my first swing on this guard, leading to an instantaneous alarm. I'm not sure anyone has ever failed the tutorial heist before, up until now. Great start, Yelwonk. To make matters worse, on the second run we got shot at yet again. 2 mission fails in the first 5 minutes, hopefully not important for how things were going to go. Unfortunately, the tutorial heists are very rigid as they're trying to teach you how to, shoot and play the game normally, so it wasn't ideal seeing as how I was trying to play it like an imbecile. In any case, we got through day 1 on the 3rd time of asking without too many problems. Day 2 was actually a lot easier thanks to not being quite as linear in its requirements, meaning a first time completion without a shot fired. I know, kind of embarrassing that we're celebrating that fact. Because of the crazy experience curve in Payday 2, this tiny tutorial heist actually leveled us up to 7, meaning we could switch to something a little more suitable, like the comically large spoon, and pick up a few points in basic utility skills like Hardware Expert, Duck and Cover, as well as starting towards some damaging melee skills. I spooned my way through the loud tutorial heist with nowhere near as many setbacks as the stealth one-shotting every cop on normal difficulty and making it to level 10 already. This would also give me the funds to purchase my first over 9,000 saw and grab the first perk card in Sociopath. In hindsight, for pure melee early on, I would have done a lot better with Infiltrator, as the 10 times boost it provides lasts for longer per kill, despite what the tooltip says. In general though, Sociopath appealed more to my desire to survive later on with its armor gating potential. Bearing in mind without crew AI, a single down would mean the end of the heist. The saw would not only help with objectives, but also presented a new way to deal damage and prevent instant mission failure if I was ever tased. For now, it was time to head to the safe house. The old one apparently, which is just another tutorial and didn't require any shooting on my part. After that, it turned out I'd already done the getting ready assignment by accident, so tutorial was over. Now, it was time for the real challenge. The first two mandatory heists are jewelry store and bank heist. It was then I realised a serious oversight in the plan. The game lets you play these story heists for free, but only on the prescribed difficulty. If I wanted to do them on, say, Overkill or above, I'd need to pay for them with offshore cash, which I didn't really have at this point. So after making a makeshift stealth build with ECM Overdrive Aced, I did the dumbest thing. I sat there for over 10 minutes, staring at the CrimeNet offline screen, waiting for a Mayhem bank heist to appear. Believe it or not, it didn't, so I grabbed the Overkill one when it showed up. Little did I remember at the time, you can select a difficulty filter in CrimeNet Online which transfers over to the offline mode, forcing all CrimeNet heists to appear at your chosen difficulty. This means I did the bank heist at a marginally lower difficulty than promised, just for the sake of my sanity. I don't think it made much of a difference, so hope you forgive me. Either way, my first bank heist run went smoothly in stealth, even with only melee range takedowns and 22 detection risk, until, like a genius, I decided to kill the tellers with the saw. Alerting every single civilian in the Washington area was not my greatest idea, and this was a real problem when I couldn't kill them outside the map. A pretty violent way to fail. One thing you will learn as you watch me stealth is that I have a grand total of 0 patience. So I went through a couple more runs playing like a lunatic, as punishment is usually minimal for failing. That's when I realised I'd blown all my money on assets and couldn't even afford the vault key at this point. As I entered the bank heist with a little more guile and cleared it easily enough, I was faced with another 3-minute wait I'd 100% earned for myself. But with the heist now complete, it was time to spend some skill points after making it to level 28 already. I grabbed the second level of Sociopath and purchased a Cavity SMG purely for slotting it into my stealth build due to its high concealment value. I'd be doing a few stealth heists early on, so it made sense to prepare for the jewelry store with upgraded ECM skills just in case I slipped up again. Decadently, I purchased the heist on Mayhem difficulty with my newly earned offshore funds. Despite having completed more jewelry stores in my time than any sane living human, I still managed to turn this heist into a mad scramble, juggling pages with ECMs thanks to this nice security guard breaking all the rules and firing his gun at me. At the time I was still trying to conserve money, so spared the alerted civs whilst I drilled the safe, leading to a rather messy heist overall. Oh well, the ice pick felt pretty great, this one staying in my stealth build. Up next, it was time for a bit of Shadow Raid, and at level 33, I already had a fairly competent stealth build put together, so this really shouldn't be hard even on Mayhem this early in the game. First though, I visited Scarface's forever empty room on this account, as the game kept playing loud music at me after every heist. After a candlelit vigil, it was time to head to the Murky Water Warehouse for a stealth classic. Not being able to shoot is much less of an issue in stealth, but it can still create its own problems, especially if you rely on shotguns to reposition guards or quickly take them out once spotted. At least that's what I'm going to tell myself. You see, I used the last of my offshore funds purchasing this damn heist, which I proceeded to fail spectacularly by falling off the Venus noob trap of Shadow Raid. Yes, Yelwonk was defeated by gravity. Then on the next run, the game crashed. Specifically because I slammed the stop record button after making the most ridiculously impatient play. Sure, that's fine, it happens, except now I couldn't afford to rebuy the heist. Yet for some reason the story mode was glowing as if I'd completed something. It turns out all you have to do is secure 4 bags, the minimum on normal difficulty, which I'd inadvertently done on that ill-fated run. So hey, nothing gained, plenty lost, but still, we proceed onwards, specifically onto the diamond store. It was at this point I remembered the heist difficulty filter in the online mode, so my quality time with the CrimeNet screen was about to plummet, or so I thought, as a crash took down attempt 2. I have no idea why these were the only crashes experienced throughout the entire series, but I'm relieved that was the case. Either way, another few minutes on the main menu and I was back in yet again. Diamond Store is one of those heists that simply can be cursed by pure RNG, which fortunately was not the case on this second run. It actually went pretty damn smoothly. Again, I had a few close calls with unruly civs, as they'd clearly sussed that Rush was a pacifist and wouldn't actually be killing any of them out of fear of the repercussions. The ECMs came in handy once again, and I was out in under 9 minutes. The bag hauling experience here was a premonition of the struggles to come. With no pack mules to help me out, it was always going to be a painstaking process. Speaking of slow processes, now that Yelwonk was sitting at level 39, it was time to try out a lethal build. I absolutely hate Go Bank stealth, especially when played solo, as it always feels incredibly RNG dependent, so now was the time to go loud. Or so I believed. Grabbing skills like Pumping Iron, Drill Sergeant, Saw Massacre, and Tension in Sociopath, I believed I'd be coming in pretty strong, but honestly, I'd overestimated myself. Even with first aid meds, throwing knives, and the recently unlocked katana, there was a glaring issue. I was hitting plenty hard enough, but large groups and snipers could easily take me out. You see, they were all focused on me, so there was really nowhere to hide. My second run took me a lot further, but was ended by a cloaker sniper combo. Remember, 1 down and it was over. For run 3 I armoured up to the combined tactical vest, but bad RNG left the drill too exposed to dozers this time. I was doing a pretty terrible job at being accurate with the saw at this point, and generally overestimating its DPS. I began to grasp the power of the throwing knife on the next run, but still didn't get much further thanks to those snipers. The worst thing was, they were completely out of my range. I'd need a god tier throw to take just one of them out, and even then would be without that knife for good, whilst they just keep respawning. I kept pushing onwards, but after a couple of embarrassing failures to even enter the bank, I decided a change was in order. It was time to try jokers. The hope was that they would distract cop attention and help specifically with the snipers. Spoilers, they don't have a great comprehension of what snipers are. A couple of attempts later, I finally found my way into the vault. All I'd need was a single bag to get this done, and with my heavy SWAT acting as a distraction, maybe this was the run. Nah, a swift 1-2 punch and I was done. Snipers just have too good of a sightline on the main objectives in this heist for it to be done in this way early on. After over an hour of bashing my head against Go Bank, it was time to concede that stealth was the way to go for now. Although the time wasn't entirely wasted, as many of the combat strategies I developed during this heist were leveraged throughout the run. Initially, stealth went about exactly as you'd expect. I had a few promising runs, but would miss a camera or be too slow with my ECM, as I forgot to bring AI, and couldn't be bothered to go back and spend another 10 minutes finding the damn heist again. This laziness paid off in the end, as my 4th stealth run was a roaring but inexplicable success. The main room clearance was easy enough, although I was still insisting on keeping civs alive. I was incredibly lucky that GenSec never sent a surveillance car to check out the bank. However, I physically witnessed civs run outside the map after spotting me, which I could do nothing about due to my weapon restrictions. Yet after ECMing them, it seemed they did me a favour and despawned? I genuinely have no idea what happened here, but am not complaining. I made it inside the vault without tripping the wire, which is a rare occurrence for me, and made out like a bandit, despite the entire neighborhood clearly realizing their bank was under siege. Oh, and I'm pretty sure I missed the phone at one point too, so the alarm decided to go off with 1 second to go, just to make it seem like things were working. In any case, this was fine by me as that window was enough to get out, even as the van began to drive away. I truly don't believe I've ever had a luckier or more perplexing heist in Payday 2. Yeah, the open vault is pretty cool, but have you ever had every possible beneficial stealth bug occur simultaneously in one of your least favorite heists? That's the real RNG. With GoBank finally out of the way, it was time for more tricky stealth missions. The transport heists were next, offering a little bit of a conundrum. What to tackle first, a tough stealth heist or a tedious loud one? Well, after riding my luck for so long, I assumed, as most gamblers do, that it was permanent, so train heist it was. Attempting this loud would have been suicide by sniper, as we learnt at the bank, so I was happier to sneak this one with a decently filled out stealth build, just minus the stealth perk deck itself. It would also count towards one of my 3 overall transport completions, which was nice. I was still having to pick up these heists via the impoverished method, so it was always a huge relief when one finally showed up. As with GoBank, the power of the throwing knife really shone through, although in hindsight, I really should have been using the ace of spades in my stealth build. This heist has always been a tricky one. Guard patrols feel very unpredictable, and many of the objectives simply force you to take extreme risk. There's a lot of space on the map, but guards are numerous and seriously concentrated. They also do a lot of moonwalking and sudden turns, so keep that in mind. Worst of all, even after opening the 3 correct vaults, which could take upwards of 10 minutes if patrols didn't play ball, there were 23 separate loot bags to haul over a pretty serious distance. Zip lines are there to help out, but ooze risk. The worst thing about the train heist is that failures would often cost between 10 to 20 minutes of your time. My least favourite failure is definitely this one. In a panic, I threw the turret part into a bin. It was so insulted that I was no longer to pick it up under any circumstances, resulting in an instant restart. On the 4th or 5th run, I actually took things a lot slower than usual after a decent time with RNG early on. I moved the turret parts individually from one end of the train and set up the zipline on the other side for ammunition. This meant I could move the more numerous loot bags a lot faster, but still safely. It took over 35 minutes, but moving the bags in sets of 2 to 3 depending on patrols felt a lot less risky. I probably could have taken out a couple of guards on the ground floor to speed this up, but these weren't 30 minutes I was willing to lose for the sake of 5. For once, patience went out in me. Unfortunately, this heist is pretty loaded in experience and cash rewards, meaning at last I had the offshore funds to simply purchase contracts again, and I had the spare points to specialise into a more suitable build for going loud. I realised that there was no way I was making it through open cover heists without distractions, so a Joker setup was where I chose to head. I aced out Joker, Confident and Partners in Crime, giving me some extra health and speed, but more importantly, my converts a load more health and even damage. Do not underestimate the carry potential of Joker cops when they're built for damage. Also, I made the key decision to pick up Shockproof Aced. This would allow me to easily deal with tasers. Without this skill, a single taser could be the end of a heist, as I could only kill them if they were in the range of my saw. Remember, without AI, cloakers will never perform their takedown on you, but tasers essentially take their place as one-hit kill enemies. For the remaining armoured transport heists, I made sure I had a saw equipped in both slots and had transporter to move those bags easily. The first aid kits would also be pivotal in getting objectives done, as they could grant me a second health bar if I really needed it. Without the ability to revive, these were as close to a second life as I got. First up, I chose Transport Underpass, mainly due to a lack of snipers. I didn't love this heist whatsoever. It felt very messy, and my loot was gold, meaning an extremely slow exfil was on the cards. It took almost 15 minutes, but I got it done in the end, and can't stress enough how important the Jokers were in covering my escape. As you can see, when I show my personal stats, it will either say undecided or the over 9,000 saw, proving not a single bullet was fired. The second AT heist I picked out was Transport Park. Again, the lack of snipers was a huge pull, and I was so fed up of the dreary looking underpass. At this point I still lacked a method to deal with shields, and my technique of bulldozer takedown was a little rough, so I'll be looking to pick up skills as soon as possible to help me out with both of those specials. In any case, the part went much smoother, with Cash being easier to move and having some decent luck in terms of transport and escape spawns, getting out in just over 8 minutes. Keep in mind, I did consider C4 for these heists, but at this point survivability was simply more essential than convenient utility and speed. Back to the assignment board, I'd already reached level 25, so could skip the moving up in the world assignment and proceed with Vlad's heist. At this point I decided to commit to Sociopath in the medium term, as its later skills could be seriously useful on this melee crusade. For more Crasher, I equipped frag grenades to speed up the destruction process and started to move towards Shock and Awe to deal with those pesky shields. With the gasoline asset and a few decently placed frags, I finished off the 50k worth of damage with a few katana swings in under 2 minutes. At this point, it was just a case of holding off until Bile got there for the escape. Easy enough, despite my best efforts to get myself killed. I'd need a few more melee skill points before I could take on massive groups with medics in like this. After crashing them all for Vlad, I headed to the 4 stores with my newly created stealth build, as level 50 comes with a new skill set slot. I committed the perk deck points I'd needed to Yakuza 3 for that extra speed with Frenzy to instantly initiate the perk. Hacker wasn't really an option, as a throwable with range was sort of necessary, and Burglar felt too slow in terms of point distribution. In hindsight, I should have grabbed Yakuza 4 for that extra experience earning, but hey, we're still learning. The points to actually proc Yakuza sort of neutered my stealth build, but we got through 4 stores nice and easy with the large safe in the China shop. Even though I didn't bring AI along, meaning I spent almost a minute lockpicking the damn thing. Twitch took the slow way round, but we still got out in under 6 minutes total. Next up, another quick stealth heist in Ukrainian Job. Easy enough, took down all security on the map with my throwing knives, and it was just a waiting game with drilling the safes. Back over to the Loud Saw build, the next heist was White Christmas. I was a little bit worried about snipers being an issue here, but there was plenty of cover to get through it. At this point, we breezed through in only 7 minutes. Things were suddenly looking like they were swinging in my favour, which is obviously not quite as fun for you guys, but trust me, I was relieved. I now had Pumping Iron Aced and Bloodthirst Basic, meaning I could slash up all comers with the katana, and if I played it right with my throwing knives, could build up some serious multipliers to demolish bulldozer health pools without the high risk saw in the faceplate method. The next heist was Meltdown, however, which was bound to showcase my hubris. Meltdown's one of my least favourite heists in the game from a functional perspective. Driving can be a mess, and the sheer volume of snipers on this heist presents a serious issue. I had a few pretty embarrassing runs where I was swamped by every single merc in the compound and overwhelmed, which really wasn't pretty. Converting allies quickly became a necessity to split their attention, which after a few runs I got down. The vault spawn here was in a pretty kind location with only a single sniper overwatching it. This meant I could shift the nukes onto the forklift reasonably cleanly with a first aid kit for insurance. I had a real smooth brain moment where I tried to whack the sniper with my throwing knives, only to discard half of my supply because I forgot railings in Payday are basically solid walls. This guy was here to stay, so I'd be having to work around him. But this is where the insanity of the forklift truck comes in. Even whilst flashbanged and driving back and forth like that scene out of Austin Powers, somehow the sniper couldn't land a shot. I made it to the Longfellow once before heading back to load up on the second set of warheads. It would take 3 runs to move all of those, but only 2 in the Longfellow if I played it right. Again, my luck outstripped my terrible driving, and the myriad of snipers couldn't seem to land a shot. I had some satisfying roadkill on the way back and loaded up once again. On the way I made a new friend in the warehouse, showed my carnival trick to a dozer, and headed back to the Longfellow for the first excursion. The boys could hold down the fort whilst I delivered the first 4 nukes to the train. On the way, I survived with about 5% HP, nearly passed out from holding my breath, and began to realise the magnitude of the task ahead. I made it, in spite of my driving, and even made it back to the courtyard, but by this time my car was at around 10% HP. You can probably sense the clench as I ran back in and threw the knife of destiny to buy myself a little time. One final trip back to the warehouse and I was in the clear, at least assuming my Longfellow didn't suffer a single scratch on the return journey. Lining it up after a fair few sniper scrapes, it was now or never really. I had no idea where the SWAT van turrets would be and just had to hope. Here's how it went. I just about scraped it in with the car on the verge of breaking down. Without a doubt, this was going to be one of the hardest heists in the run, and I think if I was already on Death Wish, I would have been in big trouble here. With a newfound confidence after getting through the hell that is Meltdown, it was time for Aftermath. An equally open and drawn out heist, or so I thought. Going into it, I picked up Clean Hit, which would hopefully reduce the burden on first aid kits to keep me topped up. Initial van locations were decent enough, and I was able to get through the more open sections of the heist without much interference from snipers. I took my general death sentence advice on this heist and decided to move the safes by hand up to the train carts before loading them into the back of the van, holding cover from the snipers at all times. Things were going pretty smoothly, ignoring the wall which came out of nowhere to catch my truck on the escape. All I had to do now was hold down the interior office and wait for Bile to show up. I already had the FAKs set up to ensure the escape. This is sort of the bread and butter of my setup, but if cops want to file in slowly, I can demolish them with absolutely no trouble, especially with there being no exterior objectives at this point. This was a surprisingly easy escape for a shockingly easy heist. It may have taken 20 minutes, but getting this done on first attempt felt like a real victory at the time. Up next, we had to knock out a quick stealth intermission. Honestly, it doesn't get much easier than Nightclub, where patience is more essential than actual skill if we're being honest. After getting through this waiting simulator, it was time for another of Vlad's classics, Stealing Christmas. I knew this heist would have a variety of objectives to slow me down, so grab some extra drill skills before heading on in. For the most part, this was never going to compare to the challenge of Meltdown, but I did prepare for the snipers during the rooftop section. I also grabbed all the extra loot I could here for future offshore expenditure, and rolled through the first few objectives easily enough. A decent throwing knife or two on the roof, and I'd created all the space I'd need to blow the skylight clean off, with first aid kits again being the MVPs in getting objectives done. This was, again, a fairly easy completion, taking us up to assignment 14. All we needed here was to hit level 50, which conveniently we already had. Next up, time for Hector's heist. These were never going to be that troublesome, but would take a fair bit longer, all being multi-day heists. First up, we had Watchdogs. After getting myself destroyed by the firing squad outside of the van not once but twice, I decided to make use of a saw location that I'm pretty sure in almost 8 years of play, no one has even considered. I dropped through the bottom of Hector's cartel van, which resulted in the cops blowing the thing up and dispersing slightly to give me a better chance of taking them out individually. Another bag-heavy mission, I was always going to try and move about 8 bags for a speedy day 2, holding out for a few minutes and moving as quickly as possible once Twitch rocked up. Of course, we'd be going for the armoured vehicle escape here to save a little extra time. Now, Watch Dogs is a classic, but it really hasn't aged well in terms of its mechanics. Day 2 is more of the same, although I embarrassingly did try to take on the entire army alone, Last Samurai style, at the start of the heist, which sort of backfired. My second attempt went a lot smoother, moving 2 sets of bags as you don't lose much time when having to wait for the escape chopper anyway. Firestarter was next on the list, a heist that shouldn't need much introduction. For day 1 we went loud, so no style points here unfortunately, but it was more bag moving simulator whilst my jokers held the line. It's great having the extra utility of the saws though, they've definitely saved me some serious time over this run. On day 2, I humiliated myself with a truly tragic stealth attempt before moving over to what I'm accustomed to, the fast and loose approach. Again, the drill and saw skills got me so far, and my reasonable tankiness, at least for Mayhem, did the rest. I had to bring across 2 servers of course, but that was more of a chore than a particular challenge. The extra healing of Sociopath was seriously helping out at this point, with cops still dealing relatively minimal damage, although I was coming up on that level 80 mark, with the dreaded Death Wish coming very soon. On day 3 I managed to not make a complete mockery of my stealth skills by cleanly ghosting this day with a few decent throwing knives. Fortunately, I engaged my brain and didn't try to set up the drill without turning off the power. Getting electrocuted here would have been an instant restart, as it would have forced me to fire my gun. With Firestarter out of the way, it was time for the last of Hector's missions. Rats. Another oldie, but one that should be easy enough with plenty of cover on day 1 and virtually skippable days 2 and 3. With this heist, I finally took the time to do some build readjustment and ace out shock and awe to help to deal with those shields. Day 1 of Rats was, as expected, a walk in the park. It's possible to board up Sniper's line of sight to you, and most of the combat is at very close range, so it was well suited to this build's strengths. Bane was as slow as ever with his meth cooking instructions, but despite the hold up, it only took about 13 minutes to complete the day. The second day is of course the deal, no reason to really mess around here, I simply picked up the intel and left. And finally on day 3, we had a sort of awkward fight over the Mendoza bus before grabbing a bag and torching the site. No use waiting around for a few minutes when I could just escape immediately. Hector's super antiquated jobs were now out of the way, and it was time for the elephants, which have honestly aged a lot better. Big Oil was the first on the chopping block, a heist which is still more experimentally complex than most modern heists. I've speedran day 1 of this contract so many times, so chose to follow that game plan here. ECM rushing is much easier with a fully auto setup though, and with my Yakuza build I'm not ashamed to say I got wrecked on multiple occasions before actually making it through and clearing out the MC safehouse. After that, it was more waiting for drills. Notice I remembered to not try the wire fence here, just in case it was electrocuted and forced me to shoot. With the handy Big Oil solver in hand, day 2 is also easy enough. In fact, I didn't realize there were so few guards on this heist. When I first started playing this game, this really was the scariest heist to attempt. In any case, I had a couple of sloppy runs before actually cleanly getting into the basement with all required information and grabbing the right fusion engine on my first attempt. Of course, Bile alerted the boys by accident, which was extra scary on this run, as not only could I not take much punishment, if I was tased, it would be all over. I hid out and played the pacifist game, trying to break cop AI where I could, which isn't really that hard in Payday, where they're more artificial than they are intelligent. I made it out clean enough and passed the heist with a fair few pitfalls to the run. Next up, sneaking time once again with framing frame. Day 1 is always easy enough, despite playing fast and loose. Unfortunately, because of my, shall we say, less than stellar sneaking maneuvers, I was left ECMing my way out and only secured 4 paintings for day 3. Shouldn't really end up mattering though, and of course day 2 was a non-event, as I didn't roll that crazy unlucky 1% chance of ambush. Day 3 has always been one of my worst stealth heists. I take far too many risks and hate the sheer quantity of bag moving. You can see this when I decide to throw down a couple of coke bags right under the nose of this guard. One run later, we made it right the way through to the framing part of the heist, and after a little incident on the stairs left me truly at the mercy of the RNG gods, I somehow made it out intact. No extra loot, but who cares? I'm getting damn good at nailing guys with those throwing knives. The final elephant heist for now, until the dreaded biker heist later on, was Election Day. This was another of those heists I've sped through a ridiculous number of times, and is pretty easy even without shooting. I bash my head against day 1 the good old fashioned way with an educated guess, and then day 2 is always a bit of messy fun. After taking out cameras, I just had to drill through a few gates and hack some machines. Turns out these are the worst drills in the game, and all guards on the map are drawn to them like moths to the flame. But with a little help from our good friend the ECM jammer again, this was a decently easy first time completion. Back to the story, of course at this point the plot thickens with the dentist joining the fray. His heist look a little bothersome for a no shooting run, so I'm pretty relieved we're still on the mayhem section of the playthrough. Up first we have Big Bang. I'm used to overdoing this stealthily but didn't really see it saving me any time, so went in with saws at the ready. Most objective times were shortened by this build, and with thermite for the vault entry plan and the elevator trick plan for the escape, it was pretty easy to maintain medium to close range at all times. This was another loot heavy heist which I just didn't see the point in dwelling on, although I'm pretty sure I could have chopped through the corridors of cops for months if I had to. An easy enough 15-minute heist overall. Continuing to help out the dentist, it's Hotline Miami up next. Day 1 was surprisingly easy. I thought snipers would give me more trouble, but the ones on the motel were easy enough to actually take out. Objectives were a breeze, even if setting fire to cars with a circular saw seemed a little bit off to me. For most of this heist, engagement range can be controlled, and it's just a case of making a break for it on the escape. Day 2 is a little more difficult when played solo. During my first run, I was 5 minutes in and all was going well. I placed myself in the eastern room, but with my jokers included, it was a writhing, hectic mess in there. Even with shockproof, I was tased multiple times in a row, and my auto heal was about 1 second off cooldown as I was downed. A rough death to be sure. My second run went a lot smoother. I refined my strategy somewhat, and instead of holding down one of the side rooms, I bounced between them both and maintained much better space in the claustrophobic penthouse. As ever, we used the fire to cover the drill for interruptions, and I made sure to save up some bloodthirst stacks to demolish the commissar as soon as his panic room opened up. No way was I going for the extra loot with all those sniper lasers around. This was a simple sub 10 minute heist in the end. With the dentist appeased, next up we'd be breaking Hawks out, a simple combat-centric heist which had me considering flashbangs over my trusty knives. I decided against it in the end and instead just moved with the van for cover whenever necessary. Snipers were easy enough to circumvent here and my armor held up really well. With the saws, the parking lot section was easy enough, and we were on to day 2 without really having to think about it. This is, I believe, the final multi-day heist, as far as I can remember. I really wonder if that's going to be the case permanently, or whether Payday 3 will receive the more complex multi-day heist once again. What would you guys prefer for the new game? As for day 2, the greatest risk was really me switching my brain off and letting the power go down. At this point, I was feeling pretty beefy for mayhem, and with the Sociopath perk deck almost complete, we were only getting stronger. Again, the FBI officers are all close quarters engagements, and even when cops maintain their distance, it's easy enough to find cover on all sides. I realized at this point just how OP Bronco Jokers could be at the start of the heist, so that's a strat I'm definitely going to use in the future. This was an easy enough escape even under fire, as I found a keycard and slid out without too many issues. Big experience for this heist, however, put me at level 79. So close to that Death Wish jump in difficulty. For now though, it was time for Hobbs Revenge, which I prefer to approach as a stealth heist due to distant sniper spawns when going loud. At this point I basically have all the skills I'll ever want for my stealth build and have Yakuza at perk 4. On my first run, despite attempting the impossible with a few nice throwing knives and pager juggling, this dude decides to fire his gun upon death. Not really ideal for stealth. A quick reset and we were back in, and I had much better objective spawn luck here. Despite another incident at the back gate, we made it to the vault easily enough. On my search for a second keycard, this happened. 3 FBI boys decided to have a little meeting right next to my pillar, which you can see me slowly wiggle around to stay out of sight. Somehow I made it through and gave the rat Hector the treatment he deserved for contracting those damn basic heists. Moving the evidence was easy enough, pathing through the basement and over the roof for a clean getaway. But with that, we hit level 80. Whilst this let me pick up Iron Man at last, which would be essential for the heist to come, it also meant that it was Death Wish time. Fortunately, the first heist I'd be facing on this difficulty was the Diamond, a notoriously easy one overall. But immediately, as I jumped in, I could feel a drastic leap in challenge. Cops were hitting noticeably harder, and without the final Sociopath perk, it was extra difficult taking down groups. I made it up to the end of the first hacking objective when juggling 2 protection areas solo became just too much. Just about sneaking past one room alive before taking a fatal gunbutt to the face as I rounded the second corner. Now, these were far from ideal spawns, so I tried again, this time making it up to the exhibit, but I just couldn't deal with what this minigun dozer was dishing out. Apparently, running headlong into them isn't a great idea. This decided it. Whilst I was waiting for more perk decks, stealth made the most sense. That's exactly what I did on the diamond. I definitely felt my movement in stealth improve over the course of this challenge, as long range kills are not really an option, so that's something that's come out of this insanity. It was easy enough getting into the exhibit, as I was lucky with civ spawns and keycards, and the rewiring is never that difficult. Once in there, with the cameras down, it's always just a case of waiting for an easily memorable grid pattern, which I got after a couple of minutes resetting. The diamond was secured, but in my vanity, I nearly got myself caught on the way out. Stay humble, heisters. Finally, we were on to the last of the dentist heists, the Golden Grin. As I've mentioned, stealth had to be the best bet here, especially with the task Golden Grin expects of you when going loud. On my first run, I got incredibly confused as to why I couldn't bag this guard, only to later realise I had bloody fireworks on my back. The more you know. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only low IQ moment of this heist. After spiking the guest drink, I had what could only be described as a mouse slip. Basically, as I went to turn, I knocked my mouse against my keyboard, which you wouldn't believe resulted in my left click being inadvertently pressed. You know what that means. Yes, I fired a bullet. I straight up broke the sacred contract, but I think a swift reset here absolves me of the crime. It's not as if the shot hit anyone, and that run canonically didn't happen anymore. Read the law. I went in for a salty run back. Trust me, I was fuming at this because it had never happened in my 12 plus years PC gaming, and I suck at Golden Grin, so was pleased with my progress at the time. In the end, it didn't really matter. My next run went even better, no firework incident, no illegal discharges, and a sub 15-minute stealth completion. I did have one minor panic here when having to wait out lasers before answering a pager, but I made it with seconds to spare. Not a bad heist. I'm feeling like some personal growth is occurring across this challenge. At this point, I was starting to recall just how ridiculously long this damn campaign actually was, but forged onward with a bomb heist. Fortunately, we only had to do one, and the dockyard was a serious no-brainer here. I had a few sloppy and impatient runs before slowing things down and grabbing the required keycards cleanly. That's pretty much the only challenging part of this heist unless you're going for all loot, so we just waited out the Moretta's docking, headed on board and located the bomb before loading up the speedboat and escaping. Classic Yell Wonk moment, I broke concentration and had to ECM for a less than clean getaway, but oh well, a completion's a completion, even if it's an ugly one. As you might be able to tell at this point, things were not going quite as smoothly as they were on Mayhem, so these upcoming heists were a little more eventful. I finally decided to bite the bullet and run a loud heist, Scarface Mansion, as I didn't fancy my chances stealthing the first section of the heist. All went really well actually, most objectives were easy enough and spawned fairly kindly. I even made it past the damn turrets, which by all accounts should have been a run killer as I can barely hit them. I ended Ernesto easily thanks to Bloodthirst and opened up his vault. As ever in these heists, it's the bags that kill me though. The pier side escape was desirable, but I knew there'd be issues with snipers on the escape. Moving the Yayo methodically, I landed one throwing knife on a sniper easily enough. But here is where you see me choke big time. My knives are going everywhere, and with hindsight I can tell you I should have been using Shuriken a long time ago, but it takes me about 15 more hours of gameplay before I have that epiphany. As you can see, I'm full on panicking here, spraying my precious knives every which way. The cost of this, the entire 20-minute run as I go down. I did actually have Stockholm Syndrome aced here, but that skill is immensely inconsistent when used solo, and I don't believe works with Joker hostages as they despawn as soon as you go into custody, so the reset was very much warranted. Stealth had to be the way now, but if you watch my initial runs, you can see how pissed I was about that last attempt. Zero patience and no mercy was the approach. But after a fair few costly failures, I slowed it down. It's actually tough to full clear the outside of the mansion without a shotgun to reposition bodies easily, so I was a little more selective and made it inside. After one failure with this Soza firing before asking questions, I actually made it all the way into the Sanctum on the next run. Killing a few remaining patrols as I still had 4 pages, we made it out to the pier, but this time there were no snipers around to ruin my day. Genuinely an easy completion in the end. I had no idea why I thought Lao would be the only way to go here. After all this stress, it was finally time for a break, with 20 levels in Crime Spree on the cards. This was easy enough given its low starting difficulty, as I rolled a diamond, which I did complete loud this time, and spent some continental coins getting a breakout, meaning I was done in just 2 heists. Back onto the grind, it was time for some classics. Bane gives us a choice here of either a lesser or counterfeit, the latter of which made more sense to me from a time perspective. Obviously we'd have to go loud on the second half of this heist, but getting through the stealth section cleanly was a huge advantage. On my first run, I met my end to a SWAT van turret right next to the water valve, and on my second attempt it was a skulldozer who pretty much single-handedly did me in. Here's a prime example, by the way, of Stockholm Syndrome just simply not working. Anyway, it didn't matter, as third time's a charm. Snipers were covering the valve this time, which were easier to circumvent with a first aid kit, and by running from house to house I seemed to really confuse the AI and keep them off the objective. The final challenge was getting out without getting sniped to oblivion, which I just about achieved on this run. This bulldozer met the business end of my saw, and that was it. Heist complete. I followed this one up with a real classic in the First World Bank. Stealth had to be the way to go here, and I'm no stranger to it on FWB. This was a really uneventful run really, with me making the decision to clear out all guards in the vault section so I could secure every available bag. At this point, leveling is only a positive thing, as the difficulty is not getting any higher, so I'd need all the cash and experience I could get moving forward. An easy, if slightly tedious solo heist. Up next, Murky Station, meaning stealth was a necessity. Really not a tough heist, although my first run was ruined by about an inch of steel railing, and I had a couple of impatient run-ins with the drone cams. Up until this point, I'd never really bothered to notice that the tools you'd need had their locations revealed by this info board, so you really do learn something new every day. An easy enough stealth fare that I got done in under 7 minutes without killing a single guard. Oh, except for this guy, he probably deserved it. Now we get on to one of the dreaded heists when I looked at the list early on. I was really hoping I could have done Boiling Point on Mayhem. On paper, it doesn't sound too tough, but with the unique Russian cops, I'd be dealing with a serious challenge on Death Wish. In particular, tasers and bulldozers gave me a massive headache. I can't tell if it's just me, but the faceplates of the Russian specialists have always felt different, and I had a nightmare soaring through most of them. Also, landing felt like a complete lottery. There was no easy way to get a convert on Boiling Point. I simply had to run in and hope I got lucky with some body blocks whilst converting. Spawns of C4, the AA guns, and the cops around them dictated heavily how things went, as did the types of enemy Overkill decided to throw at me. Certain doses early on were a bit of a death sentence, until I learnt I could bait them to the array and kill them as they mess with the console. The massive amount of space on this heist meant I had to adapt my strategies over time. Learning my best bet was to try and hide out, whilst objectives completed themselves. You'd expect things to get a lot easier once in the compound, as everything would be close quarters. But then there was the RNG of turret spawns. Obviously I couldn't take these out, so getting past them felt like a complete lottery. After a number of failures, many in the first 30 seconds of the heist, and seeing as I couldn't seem to get past the EMP section consistently, I decided to throw in the towel and change things up. It was time for a new build. It was time for Stoic 1 of 9. Armored Stoic. A meme build. You could see I was starting to lose it here, because this setup had virtually no way to defend itself. I had no damage, I relied on converts for everything, and had to hide out whilst waiting for my hip flash to recover. I also built heavily into C4 skills, the plan being that they'd defend the objectives whilst I'd avoid conflict and generally remain hard to kill. This didn't really work, although it did do a decent job of keeping objectives covered. There just wasn't enough room to keep myself alive, and the slowed movement speed of the ICTV really held me back. This experiment was a certified failure, but what if I went for a frenzy setup with melee? At least then I might be able to defend myself. Again, I made it to the EMP, but bulldozers were virtually unkillable and eventually wore me down. This wasn't happening, and the Stoic plan was definitely a moment of madness. I wasn't in complete despair yet though. The turret called to me, but I refused. Instead, I prayed to the RNG gods. It was time to slip a little deeper into madness with feigned death. This gave me a 45% chance of auto-reviving after dying, meaning every time it didn't work, I was even more frustrated with myself. The first run with this build got me inside before dying unceremoniously to a pair of dozers, but I was clearly onto something. Banging my head against this heist was definitely the way to go. What if I added Messiah to the build for one guaranteed revive? Well, obviously I'd waste my one and only remaining throwing knife right before I died to prevent myself from coming back. This was probably my second largest choke right after that abysmal ending to Scarface Mansion. In fact, guaranteeing the revive was consistently a nightmare. It was as if the cops gained clairvoyance once I was downed and started matrix dodging their way around the knives. Again, shuriken were the way to go, I just hadn't realised it yet. In any case, this build was clearly the one. I was coming closer and closer to a completion. This run in particular seriously crushed me. It was a really intense heist and I made it all the way up to the escape. Of course, this was always going to be a nightmare with no real feasible way to kill the snipers. But with incredible luck and first aid kit abuse, I made it to within 40 meters of my destination. Watching the footage back, I probably could have been more patient and waited for my jokers to catch up, providing something of a distraction. But I didn't trust myself and certainly wasn't thinking straight at this point. This was about 5 hours after my brain became pudding on this heist. As you can see, I even made it down the hill, messiahed myself back to life, and then absolute heartbreak. Honestly, I came so close to quitting here and now and calling it a day. I just couldn't see how I could execute the escape any better, but watching it back, there were options and I pathed pretty appallingly. So it was time for one last try. Once again, I made it through the entirety of the heist, but strangely, my AI converts decided to stay next to the AA guns. This was incredibly annoying when scanning in the compound, but what I can only assume to be a bug also did something strange to the spawns outside, as in, there basically weren't any when I tried to escape. With all of the specialists apparently chasing after me, this was my chance. It was the Eastern Lake escape, which I preferred in terms of sniper spawns anyway, but whatever had left the outside field empty had also prevented the snipers from spawning with their usual timing. As I rounded that final corner, there were no red lasers pointing at my head, at least not until I was on the home straight. In fact, if you watch my HUD, you can see 6 snipers spawn in, but this was too little too late. I was already home free, and for once, I was seriously praising Payday for its plethora of strange bugs. This window of opportunity I'd been granted by the gods of Payday was not one to be taken for granted, but even more insurmountable challenges awaited Yelwonk on the horizon. Fortunately, completing Santa's workshop for Vlad was not one of them. Yes, it was still messy, and the minigun dozer spawns nearly did me in, but this was infinitely easier than the trial I'd just gone through on Boiling Point, and Messiah gave me a much needed second chance now I was playing on Death Wish. This heist took about 20 minutes, as opposed to the 6 hours I'd spent in the tundra just prior. I made it out after carefully moving just 4 bags, and it was time for a real rest. Car Shop was just the stealth-only break I needed before running into the hardest wall of heists we'd encountered so far. Yes, I know, here's my customary restart due to impatience. But on my second attempt, things were cleaned up at the car shop, and even my shoddy driving wasn't going to bring us down. By the way, I'm a huge fan of how you can murder the manager during the meeting, as employees will just sit there like nothing ever happened, and that was a completely normal occurrence. I love Payday 2. Sadly, the fun was about to be halted by the tremendous roadblock that is the biker heist. Day 1 of this heist is one of my least favourites in the game at the best of times. Horrendous RNG dependence, a horrible turret spawn, a frustrating defense mechanic, and some of the most sadistically placed snipers in the game. Not to mention the tiny window of escape you're given and the array of untouchable cops that spawn on the rooftops, away from the tiny arms of my melee-only setup. I could go on, but I just knew the biker heist was going to present a massive problem. My first run was ended after 12 minutes by a sniper. Run 2 after 10 by, you guessed it, a sniper. Run number 3 was ended by sniper number 1 yet again, except I have to admit this one was completely my fault, as I was just being impatient after the bike was ready. After this failure, even knowing I could make it this far, I switched back to my janky stoic C4 build, as I hoped that could make the defense section a little easier. You see, up until now, I'd been throwing long-range throwing knives to keep the cops off my boy. Sadly, this was a terrible idea. I could hardly make it past the damn bikers, so I retreated back to what I knew with Sociopath. The run you're seeing now was a perfect storm of good luck. I had reasonable objective spawns, the mechanic placement was away from the SWAT van, which as far as I could tell could be an instant failure otherwise, and great luck with self-revives occurred early on. The hardest objective by far was helping out the mechanic at the warehouse, but once I'd made it through that, I knew we were in with a good chance of completing the mission. The Chrome Skull and Engine Collection were my other two objectives, both of which are simple and occur near to the mechanic himself. Pivotally, they were also out of the way of the dreaded turret and most of the snipers. I also found myself a nice bush to hide in, which made it easier to defend the mechanic from a closer range. I'd learned my lesson from last time and held off until the end of the assault before jumping on the bike and leaving. Just before this, I noticed that one of my jokers had taken out the sniper that had been my nemesis throughout, which gave me just the window I'd need, which was pure good fortune, as we'll soon find out, as the AI converts are appalling at locating, targeting, and actually hitting snipers. But this guy did the job for me here and guaranteed that escape. As for day 2, this could have gone absolutely any way. It was unlikely to be easy, but was only a short heist, so wouldn't drive me as mad as the last couple. As it turns out, luck was truly on my side today, as after being savagely demolished by a skulldozer on attempt number 1, things went much better in attempt 2. I made it all the way to the end of the train with basically no armoured resistance and killed the biker leader with bloodthirst. With the BCI obtained, escape to the opposite end of the train was never going to be quite so easy. A pair of green dozers basically one-shot me, but I used up one of those 45% chances to revive. Fighting as little as possible was my goal, so I charged onwards before encountering a small skulldozer army. They also took me out swiftly, but this time a cloaker decided to be an absolute hero and dive right in front of my throwing knife, graciously granting me another revive. I was slow in moving past my prior murderers and went down yet again, even with a first aid kit, but more than fortunately at this point, another revive chance was procced, and I was home free. Everything that could stop me was already spawned in, and I was out of their range. I shouldn't have to tell you how lucky this was, but also how relieved I was to have those fugitive skills for this day in particular. Getting through downless would have been an absolute nightmare. I'll be honest, at this point, I thought this was the hard part of the run pretty much complete. Then, I looked at what was up next. Panic Room. Easy enough, close quarters heist with simple objectives.
Alright, I'm close now, but there's snipers spread around the drop zone.
Wait a minute, I had to kill snipers. Oh boy. So, Panic Room presented a brand new sort of challenge. It wasn't so much hard, as it was almost impossible without my AI playing nicely. I could easily get past the gangsters and saw the Panic Room itself free, but after that, it was a complete free-for-all. Bar requires us to kill 15 snipers on the Death Wish difficulty in order for him to drop the C4 and proceed with the heist. These guys spawn between about 10 and 50 meters away from the rooftop. This meant that some could easily be hit by my throwing knives, whilst others simply could not. To make matters worse, I could never collect throwing knives from them after use, meaning at best I had 9 to use on 15 snipers. Even after I eventually realised the shuriken was a better option, this was still only 13 maximum. No matter how I looked at it, this was a huge problem. But solutions existed. First, what if I found a way to renew my throwables? Fully loaded Aced offers this, but the problem is that I can't pick up ammo with this build because I can't shoot. Combining it with a turret build so I can just wouldn't leave me with enough points to actually keep myself alive, so this idea was doomed. That meant I'd need someone else to do the dirty work for me. Jokers could, but they hate it. The shotgun cops are ironically marginally better at hitting and killing snipers from the roof, but even then their proximity targeting makes it so certain sniper spawns were virtually impervious to them. If I was going to do it this way, I'd need immense patience to hold out for well over 30 minutes. The only other form of damage I had which could target snipers was the humble turret. I mentioned I didn't want to resort to this, but for killing the rooftop campers, it would be worth it. However, these things had the exact same issue as the Jokers, and if placed to specifically take out a sniper, would often be surrounded and destroyed. This was going to be a true nightmare. On my first few runs, you see me just about coming to terms with how hard this was going to be. Going from hopefully watching the Jokers take out a couple of snipers early on, to never honing in on them again after the roof becomes too busy. The way my first run was ended was just plain cruel. Watch this. Yet they kicked me out the window. In all my days playing this game, I have never experienced such a dramatic down. What the hell? This was a sign of things to come, and after running headlong into more failure, I decided I'd need a change if I was going to make it all the way to 15 dead snipers. At this point, I decided it was time to break my no sentry rule and put together a build based around them. Unfortunately, this meant losing my RNG fugitive skills that had been so beneficial so far. It also meant losing some tankiness, which you can probably tell from my first few runs where the gangsters absolutely destroy me on the ground floor. Once I played a bit more carefully and made it up to the roof, however, they got the job done, and I could control exactly where they were placed, unlike the Jokers. However, they were fragile as anything and still had a tough time landing their shots on snipers, especially towards the roofs to the north of the entrance. At this point, I was having to wait until assault waves ended just to have a chance to take out a couple of the snipers. It just wasn't happening. Eventually my sentries would be destroyed and I'd be back to square one, just without all those safety net skills that I had been leaning on in the past. I also tried it out in a stoic build with Frenzy, and it went about as poorly as you can imagine. Not to be deterred, I went back to the original setup and rolled the dice once more. Just to illustrate how frustrating this was, watch this guy come so close to killing a sniper and then just change his mind. Remember, if they didn't fire a killing shot, it was no better than not firing at all with this build. I hit some decent throwing knives, but it was always a losing battle, with doses constantly spawning, pressuring me off the rooftop, and wasting more time with no chances opening up to pick off the objectives. It really didn't help that half the time snipers themselves were able to pick me off whilst I was going for Hail Mary throwing knife shots. After hours and about 20 failed attempts, it was time for something new. I took a break and thought long and hard about how I'd just spent the last few hours of my life. Things weren't great, but this introspection did result in me finally seeing the light and trying out Shuriken. With my standard sociopath build, these things were much more plentiful, easier to aim over long distances thanks to having lesser projectile arcs, and were more consistent at providing Messiah revives. But it still just wasn't quite enough. Although I did make it past the snipers once by some miracle, it was at the cost of multiple revives, and I went down under a barrage of flashbangs. After one more readjustment, I realised just how long I'd been doing this. I could no longer afford to purchase the heist with my offshore funds. So yet again, I was back to square one, at the mercy of CrimeNet. This is truly the apex of embarrassment as a heister. I decided to try a turret build with just a single sentry this time for a final roll of the dice, and again came up short, slain by one of my targets. I'll be honest, I was falling to pieces at this point. It was about 26 degrees in Oslo, I was melting away and slowly losing my mind. I decided that this was going to be my final attempt, but I wasn't insane enough to just go again. I wanted to tip the odds in my favour. So, I turned to the wonderful world of Payday modding to save me from my misery. More accurately, I installed a somewhat cheaty mod because snipers ruined my meme run. This is Better Jokers, a mod by Rock, which is pretty cool, but is gameplay changing, so always use at your own risk. It virtually turns Jokers into AI crewmates, but with superior accuracy and mobility. Now they'll move using bot shortcuts to get to the roof faster, and can be directed to follow or hold their positions just like standard bots. The idea was that I could force them to target snipers by sending them to nearby waypoints. Yes, Panic Room broke me to this extent, but I decided temporarily installing a mod like this was the lesser of many possible evils to potentially make it through the heist. Let me tell you, the Jokers were seriously OP. They tore through standard cops like it was nothing and really trivialized the early parts of the heist. Here's the thing though, they may have improved targeting and accuracy, but they still prioritize cops based on proximity and line of sight. This meant that snipers was still not on the menu for the most part. After a total of 36 minutes of pain and Joker micromanagement, 6 shuriken and dozer beatdowns, they finally hit the shot and killed the 15th sniper. I was free. Except I wasn't just yet. We still needed to hold down the roof, secure the magnet, and eventually defend the chopper, which involved another clearing of the roof under heavy fire and more potential snipers. Not to mention, I'd already used about 12 first aid kits in making it this far. I was completely out of shuriken as well. My resources were so low by this part of the heist it was clear that the hardest part was still yet to come. And come it did. 15 minutes of panic room and it all came down to this: Mexican standoffs with dozers and a rooftop full of medics and tasers. In a final mad rush, I stormed the roof only to be tased immediately, not once but twice in quick succession. You can actually see my brain faculties switching off as instead of going for a quick kill to arm a gate, I just throw down another first aid kit without uppers being charged and capitulate. Down I went unceremoniously. No messiah, no feigned death, just sadness. My body count read 451, but I knew I'd slain thousands on that rooftop for absolutely no reward. It was time, at this point, to throw in the towel. I was out of funds, and at the lowest point in my heisting career. Even after turning to black magic for an assist with the improved Jokers, it wasn't enough to get us through panic room without firing a bullet. You have to know when you're beat, and whilst I think we've seen that this can be done, I'm not sure it's worth your sanity. Not to mention, I'd already broken my own rules when I started modding the game. There are definitely ways I could have circumvented this. I imagine Team AI would have swamped the roof and absolutely got the job done even without Jokers, but that certainly felt like cheating within this rule set. Also, if I dropped the difficulty down to the recommended very hard, I would have had to kill fewer snipers and definitely could have got it done with just shuriken, but again, that felt like a massive rule break that would have voided the run anyway. I think the more honourable thing to do at this point is to call it quits here for Yelwonk. He did his best, but at the end of the day, was always better with a gun in his hand. Not to mention, Brooklyn 1010 was up next, another heist that requires dedicated sniper killing and likely would have provided another massive roadblock for the no shooting run. So, with panic room stopping us in our tracks, I can conclude that no, it's not possible to beat Payday 2 without firing a bullet. But you can get pretty damn close and have an amazing time on the way there. Thank you so much for sticking with this video, ladies and gents. I know it's been a long one, but I'm really excited about this new format of Payday video. My hope is that future runs can be streamed and recorded live on Twitch with viewer interaction and ideas, so maybe I'll make it a little further next time with your assistance. Payday 2 is actually an incredibly long game in terms of its storyline, so let me know if you enjoyed this video. Combined recording, scripting and editing, this was the largest labour of love I've put out on the channel since the entire story of Payday, so dropping a like if you enjoyed would be tremendously appreciated. I'll be bringing out more videos like these as soon as I can, so let me know what are the challenges and rule sets I should try out. I'd also appreciate some feedback on the general rule set employed in this video. If you have the time to spare and want to try out something fresh in Payday 2, why not give this challenge a go for yourselves and tell me how far you make it. I'd love to see some new strategies with decks like Infiltrator and hope that someone out there has the patience to actually make it all the way to the White House. In any case, that's all for me. Thank you so much once again. I'll see you all very soon. As ever, thank you very much to my Mean Infamy patrons and above. If you want to join that infamous club to see yourself in the credits or get early exclusive access to my videos, including the story videos, check out my Patreon link below. Remember the Discord is open to all if you crave some more Payday discussion. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all very soon for the next one.